I was born in Columbia, New Jersey, which is right on the Delaware River, Upper New Jersey, Warren County, August 30th, 1934. And I'm the younger of two children, two daughters. My sister Jean was 4.5 years older than I. My father's name was James Andrew Wisse, and it's spelled Wisse, and my mother's name was Agnes Muir Hogue Wisse. My father, of course, was Dutch from Holland, and my mother's family was from Scotland. They emigrated here around 1898 or something, just before the turn of the century. And my mother was the youngest of 8 children, only 4 of whom survived to adulthood. My mother was actually engaged to somebody else, and my Uncle George brought my father with him to their house to having worked on some car or something, and they were all dirty and horrible. And my grandmother said at the end of that, when he left, she said, "That man is going to be my son-in-law." It was like a prophecy, which came true. My dad's father, who lived in Passaic, and we didn't see very often, had a really loud voice. And when we went there for dinner, he would, before we ate, he would have to read a big scripture and then pray forever while the food was getting cold on the table. How long? Well, when you're 5, it seems like forever. My grandmother's name was Jean McCarroll Oak, and she was born in 1865, which is burned into my memory because she always said, "I was born in 1865, the year Lincoln was shot." Whoa! And they were shopkeepers in Scotland. They had a grocery store, which they sold and left, and came to America with 4 children, I think. My grandfather got a job with the A&P, and he drove horse-drawn cart. He was a peddler, and he died of congestive heart failure. And my grandmother was left with 4 children, a lot of children. And very short time, she lost her husband, her mother, and 2 children within 18 months or something. So it was a very difficult time. My grandmother was taking my mother with her. She was a little kid, and she was taking her with her to work. My mother somehow knew that she didn't have any money, and she's saying, "Mama, how are we going to get there?" And Mama said, "God will provide." And they got to the end, to the street where they were supposed to get the trolley, and my grandmother looked down and picked up a 50-cent piece out of the gutter. And at that time, a 50-cent piece is like finding a $10 bill. And this was after she had lost her husband, and everything looked terrible. And she's coming back from, they're walking over the Passaic River where the Passaic Falls are. And she contemplated jumping off the bridge with her children. And she said no, she could not do that. And so she decided that somehow or other she would manage to do what she had to do. And she did. And then in 1937, we moved to the farm, And the farm was in Pregness, New Jersey. And my father had never lived on a farm, so we didn't know anything about it. So we had to learn everything. But he was a quick, read. And my father endeavored to grow all kinds of stuff. Tomatoes, corn, lettuce. Nobody ate kale then. Uh, chicory, endive, eggplant, you name it, beans. And we started a farm stand that was a mile or so up the road. And my uncle, who was a crackerjack carpenter, set up the building so that it was workable. And it was very nice. We moved to this place in Sussex County, and my father had chickens there, and there was a barn, which he hadn't paid much attention to. And he was taking eggs to some customers that he knew about in Passaic. And somebody came to the door, and my mother went to the door, and it was these people from the federal government with a warrant for my father's arrest. And what? And my mother is like, what are you talking about? And they accused him of having a still. When they went out to the barn, in fact, there was a still there. My father didn't know about it because they had only been there a week or so. And the way it was discovered was the people that were there before had left in a hurry because they were being found out. And the people next door, in the farm next door, turned them in because they were throwing the mash from the still into the stream. And their cows were getting drunk on what they were drinking out of the stream, which I thought was a very funny story. It's hilarious. And my mother was home, and she washed out some stuff in the sink in the kitchen and took it out to the line, no dryer, and heard some crackling and looked up, and the roof was on fire. And she went inside and called the fire department. And the fire department was a big whistle that blew off, and then people would come from everywhere, volunteer fire department. However, that day, they were all at this neighbor's place because they were taking in hay that was going to be, if it was going to rain again, that was going to be ruined, and they had to get this hay in. So my father, as well as every other person that was on that fire department, was at the Torbert's farm bringing in that hay. And so they all came to our fire and did what they could to get it out. Someone went and got me and brought me home from my grandmother's. And when I arrived there, and I'm coming along, and I thought, oh, it's not so bad. But then when I got closer, I discovered that it was just the front of the house that was standing, and there was nothing on the second floor behind it. It was very shocking. And all I could think about was the Christmas ornaments that were stored up on the attic, and they were all gone. And what were we going to do for Christmas? I came downstairs Christmas morning, and this wonderful miracle had happened. And there's all these presents under the tree, and the tree is there, and it's lit up. And my mother had purchased dozens of little baskets that were like 2 inches long with a little bale over them, over the top. And she wrapped all those little bales in red ribbon and put a little bitty bow on each one, and it hung over a twig on the Christmas tree. And my father had cut up, I guess, hundreds of little bitty cubes of wood and painted them all different colors. And they were in these little baskets, and they were like little presents in those baskets. And those were our Christmas decorations for years afterwards because they were so unique and so beautiful. My grandmother lived with us for a long time. And my grandmother would fix breakfast for us, for Jean and I. was not a good person to make oatmeal. She made it really awful to the point where my sister Jean would never eat oatmeal again, ever. It was awful. Her oatmeal was just horrible, lumpy, like one big lump.
What was your favorite food when you were a kid?
Well, very early on, I discovered spaghetti, tomato sauce, and they have been my very favorites for my whole life. My grandmother made something called chopped meat and onions, which I don't know what was so special about it, because when I think about it, it's pretty dumb. It was chopped meat in a pot with some water in it and a whole pile of onions and salt and pepper, period. But I loved it. And it was served with mashed potatoes and peas, and I loved it.
Okay, wait, back up. How'd she cook? What kind of meat? Beef?
Chopped meat. Chopped meat.
What's chopped meat?
Chopped meat.
Oh, right. Like not hamburger.
Yeah, hamburger.
Oh,
it's called chopped meat.
Chopped meat.
Chopped meat.
Chopped meat. That's how.
Well, I went to this group that we had at our church, and there was about 20 people. That was the first time I didn't see him, but he saw me, and he asked somebody who I was, where I was from, blah, blah, blah. And then that was in September. And then in January, I was at somebody's house, and it's the same group. And we were talking. I sat on a footstool in front of, he was sitting in a chair. And we had this little conversation, and he said, the group was going on a retreat the next weekend. And I said, "Oh, are you going on a retreat?" He said, "No, I'm not going on a retreat. I have to work." And I thought, "Oh, forget this one. Has to work on Saturday." And so but I had this strong feeling that he was going to call me, and but he didn't. And around April, he called me and he said, "Would I like to go out on Saturday night?" Okay. When he brought me home, I can't remember whether he kissed me goodnight or anything, but the sparks had gone off in my head, and I was like, "Oh," and I spent the whole week going, "Ah," and and then he called me sometime during the week to say, "Would I like to go out again?" Yes. I can't really remember where we went the second time. But the fact was, when he brought me home, we sat and talked for a little bit, and he said, "I'm really kind of tired." He said, "I really didn't sleep well all week," and he said, and I said, "Well, neither did I." It was really all over. We could have gotten married the next week, but we waited for another 6 months before we announced our engagement. I can remember standing in the back of the church and saying, "What in the world are you doing? I don't know this person. Am I making the most horrible mistake of my life? This is awful." And then I started to cry. And so I'm walking down the aisle with tears coming down my face. Well, you get to the front of the church and then you pull yourself together and say the words. We stayed in a motel in around the Delaware Water Gap, and we sat in the bar, and we really didn't have anything to eat at the reception because we were so busy running around talking to all the people and all that, and then getting pictures taken and all that stuff that you have to do. And so we hadn't had anything to eat, and so we were sitting there eating clam chowder at 10:30 at night or something, And and he reaches over and he takes my hand. He said, "Those guys over at the bar, they think we're shacking up." And I was astounded that Cliff could remember every single Memorial Day for the last 25 years, what they did, where they went, who they were with. I was like, what? I can't remember last week. Cliff and I were meant to be together. We were we had a very, very good marriage. And we were married for 38 years. We had 2 children. Douglas was born in September of 1963, a whopping big baby, 10 pounds, 1 ounce. And I was so naive. I really thought that you went to the hospital and you had the baby and you walked out and you were size 14. Well, you're not. And so I came home with my skirt pinned together. I was smarter the next time, but. And then 2 years later, Heather was born, and she was born on the 5th of December, 1965. I had much less anxiety because I had some experience with babies with the second round. We found this house in Glen Ridge, which was a big house. Here we are, doing over a kitchen, having a baby. It was awful.
But you also had a little toddler, right?
We had a little toddler, and I am in the dining room ironing. This is when you had to iron every stitch of clothes that you owned. And I'm ironing, and he keeps running in and saying, "See, see," and I'm like, "Oh yeah, oh yeah." And after a while, I walk into the kitchen, and I find out that he has broken 10 eggs on the floor. And oh, now I see. A funny thing that happened for Christmas when he was 2, I think. Um, my sister and her husband gave him for Christmas this big box that had these cardboard blocks in it, and they just fit nicely into that box. And it was the purpose of was to store them in it. Only we piled the blocks all up in the corner, and for 1 year, every time he sat down with a TV or he would sit in it all the time. He sat in that box, and he had a blankie which he carried around with him at all times. In fact, I didn't have a dryer until Heather was born, and I washed them. I grabbed the blanket because it got so dirty all the time, and I put it through the wash, and I hung it up on the line, and he hauled it off the line, and he's dragging it around wet.
What about Heather? Did she do funny things?
Oh, she was funny. She never walked. She ran. She started walking when she was 11 months and 4 days old, and she got up and ran. And she ran. She always ran. She never walked. Or she jumped. She would jump like a jumping jack from place to place, and she was so funny. And she was always changing her clothes. Every 20 minutes, she was changing her clothes, and the clothes were all over her room at all times. It was impossible to keep her room tidy. Another funny thing that he did, only I probably shouldn't tell this. We had these two trees in the backyard that were some kind of pine trees, and they had branches out all the way up. And so I am going to uh, some kind of event at the Waldorf with my sister-in-law, Barbara Estes, and my mother is coming down to babysit the children. And I go out and I'm saying, "Where's Doug? Where's Doug?" And Doug is up on the top of this tree. And I'm like, "Come down now, come down now." And he's coming down and he's crying. And when he gets down, I notice he's wet his pants. And now you've wet your pants. And oh my goodness, this is awful. And now we have to go in and change and da da da. And so he says, I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, I climbed up the tree because I thought it'd be so cool to pee from the top of the tree. But then when I got up there, I couldn't get it out."
Oh my God, that's funny.
I remember being very, very upset during Cliff's illness. And I was tired and I really had no idea what to do and, or how to continue, I guess is a better way. And, I was in bed, it was nighttime and I was in bed. And the thing was, I never got a night's sleep. I was always up a couple of times a night with him. And so I was tired. And I remember praying. And I have a friend in New Jersey who always used the expression "pray like a bishop." Well, I was praying like a bishop. And 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 then it came to me that it was almost like a warm blanket went around me, and it was going to be okay. And there's the verses in Ephesians that say, "Be anxious for nothing, but in everything with prayer and supplication, with thanksgiving, make your requests be made known to God. And the peace of God, which passes all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds." And that was exactly what happened to me at that moment. And I never had that anxiety again. And I really believe that the answer to those prayers was Douglas and his coming into our lives. And I didn't know it at the time, but he was very adept at taking care of people that were in his situation. And he took care of a lot of the and the end time dealings of the messiness. And so it was a huge blessing to me. And then he was a huge blessing since then, after that, because he was like a friend to me. Where I had never been alone before. I lost my father about a year before Cliff died. So he was a good friend too. And Cliff was my best friend. And he was gone, and I knew that that was not going to be anymore.
You must really have missed him.
No. I tried very, very hard to go on. And I did. And Doug says to me frequently, Doug Estes says to me frequently what a good adjustment I made, and how some people that he's encountered, have been like, bad, weeping and wailing and carrying on. I did lots of weeping and wailing, but I did it in private. Well, my mother sang professionally, which means she got paid for it. She sang at weddings and things like that and got paid. So it's a professional thing. She couldn't have made a living at it, but she did get paid for what she did. And she was the paid soloist at a church in, I don't know, Patterson or Clifton or someplace in New Jersey. And my father sang, she sang soprano, my father sang bass. And I can remember feeling very, very embarrassed because my mother and father sang so loud in church. When I was sitting next to them, I was like, whoa, all these big voices all over the place. Cliff could not carry a tune in a basket, in a barrel, in a truck. It was really bad. He just could not sing. And I remember saying that to my mother. My mother said, oh, he has such a lovely resonant voice. He must sing beautifully. And I said, no, Mom, no. And then we were in church one Sunday morning, and he stood next to her. And she reaches over and she says to me, you were right. We were all singers. I remember this was not when I got married, but this was after, when we would be sleeping upstairs here, and we didn't have any TV, so we used to play the radio. And there was this guy whose name was Harry Golden, who played, was a disc jockey, and he played a Nightingale sang on Berkeley Square, and I had never heard that song, and I just loved it. And it's a song that's become a favorite of mine.